What would you do if the love of your life betrayed you in the most public, humiliating way imaginable, then tried to convince you it was no big deal? This is the story of one night that destroyed a marriage, a family, and an entire community's reputation. Sharon was upset. No, she was downright furious. I could tell just by looking at her. I'm Frank Miller, her husband of 10 years, and as I drove us home from a party hosted by Anne and Hank Vanderlyn, her anger practically radiated from the passenger seat. She was huddled as far away from me as the car allowed, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a tight scowl that could have curdled milk. Why was she so mad? Well, to be fair, I understood her frustration. I had, in her eyes, ruined her evening. And not just ruined, it was more like I'd brought the whole night crashing down. Was I embarrassed about it? Maybe I should have been. After all, she was the mother of our 3 kids. But right then, shame was the last thing on my mind. So, what did I do to deserve her wrath? I pulled out the wrong key. Let me explain. The Vanderlyns are known for throwing lavish, over-the-top parties, and this was our first invitation. Sharon had heard about them through a mutual friend and was thrilled when we got an invite. But what she conveniently failed to mention to me was that these parties had a peculiar tradition. A tradition I wanted absolutely no part of. The night went on like any other party, small talk, drinks, laughter, and mingling. But as things started to wind down, the atmosphere shifted. Sharon, who had been unusually giddy all evening, suddenly grew more excited. That's when the host, Hank, announced the special part of the night. Apparently, all the wives were expected to drop their house keys into a decorative bowl. Then, one by one, the husbands would reach in, grab a random key, and pair up with the wife who owned it. The kicker. This wasn't just a harmless party game. The husband and wife would spend the rest of the night together, in her bedroom, indulging in, shall we say, activities that were anything but innocent. I was stunned. My jaw practically hit the floor as I realized what was happening. Sharon, on the other hand, looked entirely unbothered, even amused. It hit me then that she knew. She'd known this was part of the plan and hadn't breathed a word to me beforehand. The anger that boiled up inside me was unlike anything I'd felt before. I grabbed her hand and stormed off to the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the other guests. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? I demanded, barely keeping my voice low. She shrugged, giving me a sly smile. Yes, I knew. And you didn't think to tell me? To maybe clue me in before we walked into this insanity? Her smirk didn't waver. Because I knew you'd refuse. You wouldn't have come. You're absolutely right, I wouldn't have come. And what makes you think I'd be okay with this now? She didn't answer, just crossed her arms and stared at me, as if daring me to make a scene. The audacity of it all left me reeling. She'd gone behind my back, decided for both of us that we'd take part in something so outrageous. Without another word, I grabbed her coat, marched her out the front door, and drove us home in silence. That's where we were now, the car filled with nothing but the sound of the tires against the asphalt and her stony silence. I'd ruined her evening, sure. But in her attempt to drag me into this twisted game, she'd turned our marriage into a battlefield. I won't agree to this, Sharon, I said firmly, my voice low but resolute. I always have a choice. Her eyes flashed with frustration as she stepped closer. Frank, we can't just leave. It would be rude. You'll embarrass me in front of everyone. Don't put me in that position. Embarrass you? You think this isn't already humiliating for me? It's only for one night, she continued, ignoring my protest. Just one night, Frank. Think about it, it could bring some excitement back into our marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I don't need this kind of excitement, Sharon. Let's apologize and leave. Now. She sighed heavily, her tone shifting from persuasion to pleading. Frank, I need this. I've spent years being a wife, a mother. Just for one night, I want to feel like more. Just one night, and it's over. It'll never happen again. I shook my head, my jaw tightening. No. That's not how this works. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost conspiratorial. It's too late anyway. I've already put our house key in the bowl. My heart sank at her words. I stared at her, a mix of disbelief and anger churning in my chest. It's not too late. I grabbed her hand, ignoring her attempts to pull away, and marched back into the living room where the other guests were gathered. The mood in the room shifted as heads turned toward us, eyes darting to the bowl of keys in the center of the room. "Frank, stop!" Sharon hissed, trying to wrench her hand free. I released her, but I didn't stop. Striding straight to the bowl, I dug my hand into the pile of keys, searching for the one with the distinctive red plastic cover, the key to our house. The room was silent except for the faint clink of keys as I rummaged through the bowl. When I finally found it, I held it up for everyone to see. The red plastic gleamed under the soft light as I turned to face the crowd. "I'm sorry, but I wasn't informed about this." "Entertainment before my wife brought me here," I announced, my voice steady but loud enough to be heard by everyone. "I have no intention of sharing my wife with anyone. My wedding vows mean something to me, and I don't believe in adultery." There were murmurs of disapproval, a few annoyed whispers, and several hostile glares aimed my way. But I didn't care. Not one bit. I turned to Sharon, who stood frozen, her face pale with anger and embarrassment. "Sharon," I said, my tone softer now but no less determined, "you have a choice to make. Right here, right now. Come with me and leave all of this madness behind, or stay, and never come home again." "I'm leaving." All eyes in the room shifted to Sharon. Her face flushed crimson, her expression oscillating between defiance and shame. For a brief moment, she looked ready to argue, to dig her heels in. But she hesitated. Sharon turned back to the stunned partygoers and plastered on a strained smile. "I apologize to all of you for my husband's rude behavior," she said, her tone dripping with forced politeness. "I'd love to stay, but under the circumstances, it's probably best for me to leave." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. She reluctantly turned and followed me out the door, her steps heavy with frustration. The car ride home was silent, but tension filled the air like a thunderstorm waiting to break. When we finally walked into our house, I closed the door and faced her. "I'm more than a little dismayed, Sharon," I began, my voice calm but firm. "After 10 years of marriage, I find out you want to share your bed with another man. What am I supposed to think?" She huffed and crossed her arms. "It would have been just one time, Frank. Out of the hundreds of nights we've spent together and will spend together, it would have been just one night with another partner. That's not a big ask, considering I've been a good wife for the past 10 years. Her casual tone only fueled my anger. "Actually, Sharon, it's a very big ask. I can't believe I'm hearing this from you. But let me get this straight, it really means a lot to you, doesn't it?" "Yes," she admitted, her voice softening slightly. "And you've always been so good to me, Frank. You always do the right thing by me." I stared at her, waiting for the catch. It didn't take long. "But you know I couldn't have gone through with it alone," she added. "We both had to participate. Each of us was supposed to spend the night with a new partner. That's how it works." I shook my head, my patience hanging by a thread. "Sharon, I've told you, I don't want any part of this. I've never cheated on you, not once, and I never will. I won't lay with another woman while we're married." She blinked at me, confusion and hurt flickering across her face. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means exactly what I said," I replied. "You need to make a decision. If you're so set on doing this, then go. Go back to your friends and their adulterous games." "That's not fair," she shot back. It's not like I'd end up pregnant or anything. I'm on the pill, Frank. This isn't about that, it's about one night. Just one night with someone new. It would be exciting. Haven't you ever wondered what it'd be like? A new face, a new body, new sensations, all of it so fresh and different. It could even make things better between us. You'll see. I stared at her, the words cutting deeper than I expected. Well, Sharon, I said coldly, I hope the new guy's face and all those new sensations are worth it. Because that one night might cost you your husband and your family. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of fear behind her bravado. No, that won't happen, she said quickly. I won't allow it. We're married, Frank. We'll always be married. We belong to each other. Her words sounded convincing, but they felt hollow. I shook my head, the weight of the night pressing down on me like a stone. We belong to each other. I repeated. Then prove it. Because right now, Sharon, it doesn't feel that way. I love you, Frank, Sharon said, her voice softer now. I know how much you love me, too. We'll get through this, you'll see. I'll make it up to you 1,000 times over. Her words sounded hollow to me. I shook my head, my chest tightening. You're breaking my heart, Sharon, I whispered, unable to hold back the tears that blurred my vision. Don't be so dramatic, she replied, waving a hand as if brushing off my emotions. You're acting like a child. Just think of it as an adventure, something exciting, something different. Exciting for you, I said bitterly, but a tragic end for us. You're talking nonsense again, Frank, she said, rolling her eyes. Stop being so uptight. Her indifference crushed me. The tears came harder now, unstoppable. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, was willing to risk everything for a single night with a stranger. From the way she acted, it was clear she believed I'd get over it. She probably thought I'd be angry for a few days, sulk in silence, and then cave when she turned on her charms. She'd pull me into bed, and I'd forgive her like it never happened. Well, she was dead wrong. My father's words echoed in my mind from years ago, a man's worth is defined by the boundaries he sets and the principles he keeps. As I pulled into our driveway, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. My heart leapt, foolishly hoping it was Sharon, calling to tell me she'd changed her mind, that she wanted me to come back and get her. But the screen told a different story. It wasn't Sharon. The caller ID read a name I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Hello. I said, my voice weary. Laughter and music blared in the background, unmistakably the sounds of the Vandalen's party. A man's voice came through, smug and casual. Hey, Frank, old man. This is Rick Wilson, from the party you stormed out of. Your lovely wife gave me your number. I guess she's hoping I can talk some sense into you. My grip on the phone tightened. I stayed silent, my jaw clenched. Look, Rick continued, his tone dripping with arrogance, she's a gorgeous woman. She's excited about what's in store for her tonight. Why don't you let her enjoy herself? Maybe loosen up a bit, huh? I didn't answer. Instead, I hung up, the call ending with a sharp beep. My hand shook as I set the phone down. It was the final straw. Once inside the house, I moved on autopilot. I went to the bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept important things. I pulled out my wedding certificate, the one that once symbolized everything I thought our marriage stood for. Then, I slid off my wedding band and set it next to the certificate on Sharon's pillow. My heart felt like it was shattering into pieces, but I couldn't stop now. I folded the certificate neatly, placed the ring on top, and stepped back. The house was suffocating. Without another glance, I grabbed my car keys, locked the front door, and drove off into the night. At first, I thought about finding a motel a few miles out of town, someplace where I could clear my head and figure out what came next. But something compelled me to drive past the Van der Lind's house one more time. The scene was quieter now. Several cars had left, and only a handful of people stood outside in pairs, chatting under the dim glow of the streetlights. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Instead, I drove past, the knot in my stomach tightening as I imagined what was happening inside. This wasn't just a betrayal of our vows. It was a betrayal of trust, love, and the life we had built together. And in that moment, as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I realized there was no going back. I didn't see Sharon as I drove past the Van der Lind's house, but I assumed she had already moved on with her new adventure. Maybe she'd been paired with that Glenn guy, the one she mentioned before. He seemed polite enough when I met him earlier, but the thought of him being with my wife made my stomach churn. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed with a message from Sharon. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Frank, I'm at Glenn's house now. His wife and her boyfriend are here too, but they're staying in another part of the house, far enough away so we won't hear each other when things get heated. Glenn's been so reassuring. He said he won't force me to do anything I don't want to. He's married too, and he has kids, just like us. I feel so comfortable with him. You know how loud I can get when you touch me." The message ended with a laughing emoji. I could almost hear her giggling like a schoolgirl as she sent it. My blood boiled. How could she be so casual, so indifferent about the hurt she was causing me? She'd thrown me to the wolves at the party, humiliated me, and now she was rubbing salt in the wound. The image of her with Glenn, someone else's husband, burned into my mind. I clenched my fists so hard I thought my knuckles might split. I wanted to ignore her message, but the anger, the humiliation, and the betrayal were too much. I called her. She picked up on the third ring, her voice light and carefree, as if nothing was wrong. "Hey, honey," she said, her tone almost cheerful. "Glenn and I just got into bed and are getting comfortable. I can't talk long." The words made my heart pound with rage. "Shut up, Sharon," I snapped, my voice trembling. "This is the last you'll ever hear from me." She hesitated, but only for a second. "Frank, I'm sorry you're upset, but this is something I have to do. Glenn got my key, and I promised him he could be with me. He's ready now, and, oh, God, I have to go." "Don't say it," I interrupted, my voice cracking. "Don't say you love me, Sharon. Because if you do this, it's over. You'll end our marriage." "But I do love you," she protested. "I'll always love you, Frank. Please try to understand." The words were a dagger to my chest, but what came next sealed everything. I heard her whisper faintly to someone else, "Take me, Glenn. This is my night." Something inside me broke. I hung up the phone, staring at it in disbelief. My hands trembled as I tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. My heart felt heavy, my mind clouded with grief and fury. I wanted to scream, to break something, to undo the night entirely. Instead, I muttered to myself, "See her as often as you want, Glenn. She's lost me forever. That's a promise." I waited for her to call me back, to realize the gravity of what she'd done. But she didn't. The silence was deafening, a cruel confirmation that my wife, my Sharon, had crossed the line I couldn't forgive. I knew Sharon. I knew how she got when she was with someone, how she lost herself completely in the moment. When she was in that special world of hers, nothing else mattered. Not me, not the years we'd spent together, not even our kids. It was just her and the man she was with. That thought gnawed at me, eating away any remnants of the love I still held for her. I wasn't sure if she had even read my last message, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Our marriage was over. There was no way I could take her back after the way she disrespected me, humiliated me, and threw away everything we'd built together. Sharon's choices had made that crystal clear. After leaving the motel that morning, I called my mom. She'd been watching our kids for the weekend, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding in my life. When I explained what had happened, she was as shocked as I was. She assured me the kids didn't know anything and promised to keep it that way. "Take your time," she said. "Figure out what you need to do. They're safe here." I told her I'd pick them up soon, but only once I had a plan in place. As much as I hated to admit it, Sharon was a good mother, at least until the events of last night. She loved our children deeply, and I suspected that if it came to custody, she'd likely be granted it, at least initially. That realization stung almost as much as her betrayal. How had we come to this? After hanging up, I headed to a diner a block from the motel to grab breakfast. The stale coffee and greasy eggs matched my mood, but I ate in silence, trying to sort through my thoughts. My mind wandered to Sharon again, her voice from the previous night replaying in my head like a broken record. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Frank," she said, her voice trembling, a mix of sobs and desperation. "I'm sorry. I really am. Last night was special. It made me feel like a young girl again. I'd forgotten what it was like to laugh and scream at the same time." I didn't say anything, my grip tightening on the phone. "But," she continued, "as great as last night was, you are my man, Frank. My only man. I know I made a mistake, and I know how to make it up to you. Come home. Let me prove to you how much I love you. Let me show you that I can make this right." Her voice cracked, and she began to cry. "Frank. Why can't you understand? I just needed one night. One night to feel alive, to feel desired." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I'd always shown her how much I desired her. Sure, her body had changed after 3 kids, but I loved her for it. Her curves, her smile, the way she moved through a room, she still turned heads, and I never failed to tell her how beautiful she was. So, what was this nonsense about needing to feel desired by another man? Wasn't my love enough? I shook my head, her sobs fading into background noise as I realized the truth. It wasn't about me, or even about Glenn. It was about Sharon and whatever hole she was trying to fill. But that hole had nothing to do with me, and I wasn't going to destroy myself trying to fix it for her. "Goodbye, Sharon," I said simply before ending the call. I sat there in the diner, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing: there was no going back. Not now. Not ever. I loved Sharon. I desired her deeply. I'd spent years showing her, time and time again, just how much she meant to me. I brought her flowers for no reason, planned date nights at least once a week, and even bought her sexy lingerie to make her feel beautiful. Every single day, I told her how much I loved her and how gorgeous she was. Until last night, I thought our intimacy, our connection, was as solid as ever. I had no idea she felt like something was missing, or if she did, she never told me. And now? Now, she had the nerve to tell me this was just a small mistake, a one-night indulgence that I was supposed to understand and support. She insisted that all they did was have love, only 3 times at night and again in the morning. "That's it," she said. As if somehow, that made it better. As if those words didn't twist the knife she'd already plunged into my heart. She even admitted that she hadn't turned off her phone fast enough, and there was a chance I might have heard her and Glenn starting their little escapade. Sharon said she hoped I hadn't heard too much, but I could tell she wasn't sorry about the act itself, only that I might have been exposed to it. She always did know how to cut me deeper than anyone else could. The next day, I went to pick up the kids from my mom's house. They were thrilled to see me, their faces lighting up the moment I walked through the door. It was a bittersweet moment. When they asked where their mother was, I struggled to find the right words. She's working on a special project, I told them, forcing a smile. It's really important to her. You'll be staying with Grandma for a little while longer. They accepted my explanation without question, their innocence shielding them from the storm brewing between Sharon and me. I spent the evening playing with them and joined them for dinner. We laughed, talked about school, and for a few fleeting hours, it almost felt like everything was normal. When it was time to leave, I hugged and kissed them goodbye, promising to see them again soon. As I headed back to my motel, I felt a heaviness in my chest. I needed closure, something to make sense of the chaos. So before calling it a night, I drove past my house. There she was, sitting on the front porch. Her shoulders were hunched, her face buried in her hands, and the ground around her was littered with tissues. For a split second, I felt a pang of pity for her. But then the memory of what she'd done, what she chose to do, came rushing back, and my sympathy turned to ice. She hadn't just betrayed me, she betrayed our family. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but instead, I clenched my fists, turned back to my car, and drove away. Let her wallow in her regret. If she needed comfort, she could call Glenn. He'd made his bed with her, let him lie in it. Monday came faster than I expected, and I had a full day ahead. Before tackling my errands, I met with two of my closest friends, Max and Doug, at the Lava Bar on the beach. I got there early, hoping the ocean breeze would calm my nerves. Max arrived a little after 5, with Doug showing up 10 minutes later. We greeted each other warmly, found a table on the patio, and ordered beers. To friendship, Max said, raising his glass. To surviving the madness of life, Doug added with a grin. I raised mine, but my heart wasn't in it. They both noticed. Doug leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. What's the matter, Frank? Your call seemed serious. I took a deep breath, staring at the condensation on my glass. Sharon cheated on me, I said finally, my voice low but steady. And then she had the audacity to rub it in my face. Their expressions darkened, a mix of anger and disbelief washing over them. Max shook his head, setting his beer down hard. You're kidding. I wish I were, I replied, the bitterness clear in my tone. She went through with it. And now? She wants me to forgive her, to come back as if nothing happened. Doug leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. Frank, you don't deserve that. No one does. Yeah, Max added. She crossed a line. What's your next move? I sighed, looking out at the waves crashing against the shore. I don't know yet. But whatever it is, there's no going back. I told them everything. I didn't hold back. Max and Doug sat there, stunned into silence as I recounted what Sharon had done. When I finally finished, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted by my own words. God, this is hard, man, Doug said, shaking his head. I just can't believe she did something like that. Me neither, Max added. But she did. We sat there for a while, the weight of it all sinking in. After a long silence, Max finally spoke up. Frank, what's the financial picture looking like? Have you thought about what happens next? I nodded, though the thought of unraveling everything was overwhelming. We have the house, my retirement account, some savings, all of it adds up to maybe $700,000 or $800,000. Maybe a little more. The court will probably split it all in half. She'll get the house, and since she'll likely get custody of the kids, that's pretty much a given. Doug leaned forward, his expression sharp. But you might not have to pay alimony if you can prove adultery. And from the sound of it, you've got a pretty solid case. You know a good lawyer? I asked. Doug nodded. One of the partners at my firm is Maddie Carson. She's one of the best family law attorneys in Mississippi. She'll make sure you're protected. I let out a long breath, nodding slowly. I'll call her first thing tomorrow. That night, as I sat in my motel room, my phone buzzed. It was Sharon. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Frank," she began, her voice shaky. "Please, can we talk about this?" "Talk about what, Sharon?" I said coldly. "About how you destroyed everything we had for a meaningless night with Glenn." "Frank, it wasn't meaningless," she said softly. "It was just, one night. One night away from you after 10 years. That's not grounds for divorce." I let out a bitter laugh. "Think again, Sharon. In Mississippi, adultery is definitely grounds for divorce. Whether it's 1 second or 1 night, it's still cheating." "Why do you keep calling it cheating?" she shot back, her voice rising. "It was just a fling. A moment of excitement. I told you it didn't mean anything." "It meant enough for you to break your vows," I snapped. "I told you the second you had love with another man, it would be over. And I wasn't kidding." "Please, Frank," she sobbed. "You can't throw this away." "I'm throwing this away," I said, my anger rising. "Sharon, you broke my heart into a million pieces and didn't even care. Remember me? Your husband. The man who loved you completely from the moment he saw you. The one who worked himself to the bone to give you and the kids the life you wanted." "Frank, You spat in my face, Sharon. You chose to leave me and find comfort in the arms and bed of a complete stranger. You gave him the parts of yourself that were supposed to be mine. And now you want me to forgive you." "I made a mistake," she cried. "I'll make it right, I promise." "It's too late for promises. You didn't care about the consequences when you did this. You even called me a big brat for being upset about it. But you're going to find out what it feels like to face humiliation. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did." "No, Frank, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "My parents, they'll be devastated if they hear this." "Too bad," I said coldly. "You should have thought about that before. You made your bed, Sharon. And you filled it with Glenn." Her sobs echoed through the line, but I didn't feel pity. She wanted a new experience, new sensations, and she got them. But now, she'd have to live with the fallout. Without another word, I ended the call and stared at the phone in my hand. The Sharon I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. There was no saving this. There was no going back. I wanted this, Frank. I needed it, Sharon said, her voice trembling with frustration. I needed to experience another man, just once. It didn't mean I loved you any less, it never did. I just needed something new, a fresh experience, and then I could come back to you, fully committed, never to stray again. Her words felt like daggers. I clenched my fists, barely able to contain my anger. "But Sharon," I said, my voice shaking, "you didn't respect me. I begged you, over and over, not to do this. I asked you, pleaded with you, but you just smiled and said, again. Sharon, why?" She exhaled loudly, exasperated. "Why can't you understand? This was something I needed, Frank. Why do you have to be so stubborn about it? Nothing has changed. I'm yours forever." "No," I said, my tone icy. "Everything has changed. You're not just mine anymore. I don't know why you can't grasp that. You voluntarily betrayed me, Sharon. You ripped us apart. This wound you've inflicted on me. It'll bleed for the rest of my life." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Frank. I didn't think. That's the problem, isn't it?" I cut her off. "You didn't think. And now it's too late. I've already found a lawyer, and tomorrow I'm filing for divorce on the grounds of adultery." Her face paled. "Frank, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can. I shook my head, the resolve in my heart outweighing any sympathy I might have once had. It's done, Sharon. You made your choice. Now, you'll live with the consequences. The next day, I met with Maddie Simmons, the divorce attorney Doug recommended. She was sharp, no nonsense, and efficient. I laid everything out for her, sparing no details. When I played the audio recordings I had of Sharon admitting to her night with Glenn, Maddie's expression shifted from shock to disbelief. She admitted all of this, willingly? Maddie asked, shaking her head. Yes, I replied. She doesn't even seem to understand why I'm upset. She thought I'd just get over it. Maddie sighed, jotting down notes. This is almost too straightforward. Her voice messages are enough to prove adultery without question. Frank, you have a very strong case here. That's all I want, I said. I'm not trying to hurt her unnecessarily, but I can't let her actions go unchecked. By Friday, I had made arrangements for the kids to spend the weekend with me. When I picked them up from Sharon's house, she looked tired, her face drawn and pale. For a fleeting moment, I felt sorry for her, but the thought was quickly replaced by the memory of what she'd done. The kids were overjoyed to see me, and their laughter was the only light in an otherwise dark time. We spent the weekend playing, watching movies, and talking about everything except what was happening between their mother and me. It was hard to pretend, but I wasn't going to drag them into this mess. By Wednesday, I forced myself to return to work. I couldn't afford to neglect my job, not now. I needed the money, but more importantly, I needed the distraction. I couldn't let myself drown in the misery of it all. Still, the wheels in my mind were turning. The Vandelans party and their circle of secrecy had to be addressed. Maddie had suggested a subtle but effective way of raising awareness without directly naming names. She hinted that leaking photos of couples entering and leaving the Vandelans' house could cause a stir in our conservative community. This isn't about revenge, she said, her tone measured. It's about accountability. The religious majority here won't tolerate this kind of behavior if it's brought to light. I didn't care for vengeance, but I couldn't deny the thought of exposing their deceitful games gave me some satisfaction. They'd taken so much from me, my trust, my family, my marriage. If their actions came with consequences, maybe others would think twice before following the same destructive path. I handed Max the little evidence I'd managed to collect, and he assured me he'd start with that. His enthusiasm gave me a glimmer of hope. With a firm handshake and a promise to touch base soon, we parted ways. The weekend with my kids was a much-needed reprieve. We went shopping for new clothes, caught a showing of Disney's Grand 18, and laughed like we didn't have a care in the world. For a brief moment, it felt like things were normal again, like I wasn't in the middle of a life-altering storm. Behind the scenes, though, I'd quietly managed to hide about a third of my savings by placing it in accounts under my children's names. I wasn't taking any chances. On Monday, Max called with an update. His friend from the newspaper had been doing some digging and uncovered that the wife-swapping crowd was planning another gathering at the Vandelans' house on Friday night. The plan? Max's friend would park in an unmarked van across the street, equipped with a camera, and take photos of everyone coming and going. He wanted to interview me again, to dig deeper into what I'd experienced at the party. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with yet another call from Sharon. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Frank, she began, her tone pleading. I love you. Glenn didn't mean anything. All he did was, a few times. It wasn't an affair. It was just a mistake, that's all. I laughed bitterly. Oh, forgive me, Sharon, I said, the sarcasm dripping from every word. Apparently, I've been operating under the false idea that having love with someone other than your husband counts as cheating. How could I have possibly made such a terrible mistake? Frank, please, she begged. You're blowing this out of proportion. It's over, Sharon, I said, my voice cold and final. I warned you. I begged you not to do this. But you did it anyway. And now you'll have to live with the consequences. And let me tell you something, you'll soon discover that your problems are far from over. Goodbye. I ended the call and leaned back, exhausted. This was my life now, picking up the pieces while Sharon clung to the delusion that she could fix what she'd broken. By the weekend, Max's friend had done his job. He'd captured over 100 photographs of people entering and leaving the Vandalen's house. According to him, many of the city's most prominent citizens were among the attendees. Curiously, he noted that it didn't seem like the same couples who entered the house were leaving 2 hours later. Max assured me that Sharon wasn't among the participants that night. Still, I couldn't help but feel vindicated when I learned that several of the photographs included recognizable faces, easily identified by the cars they drove and the clothes they wore. These were the city's elite, business leaders, public figures, even a few faces that appeared regularly in church pews. It was only a matter of time before the story blew up. By Monday, the entire city was buzzing. The article hit the papers, and the radio and television were abuzz with reactions. Several priests took to the airwaves, condemning the immorality that had infiltrated their community. Civic leaders denounced the parties as a stain on their city's reputation. Lawsuits and countersuits began to fly, but the damage was already done. The jewel of the South had lost its luster. Meanwhile, I continued rebuilding my life. Sharon's betrayal was behind me, but its effects lingered. I started dating again, meeting a few wonderful women. Yet, no matter how kind or understanding they were, I couldn't bring myself to fully commit. Some wanted to move in, but I found myself hesitating every time. The idea of handing over a key felt like a bridge I wasn't ready to cross. In the end, Sharon never seemed to fully grasp why her actions were so unforgivable. But that was her problem. I wished her luck, whoever her next husband might be would surely need it. As for me, life moved forward, one cautious step at a time.